So today for our privacy seminar, we have with us Malu Septien Milan, who's a privacy practice lead at Accenture. So she'll be talking about data management and governance for privacy compliance. And she's been working in this space for quite a while, and is a senior executive leader, a cross-boundary collaborator, and culture change agent of large IT programs that transform the old way of doing things into efficient and effective utilization of technology for scale. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your insights on this important topic, and I'll pass it off to you.
So a little introduction about myself. As you can see, I've been around a bunch of companies in my journey. I do a lot of digital transformations, automating factories at AT&T. I seeded new capabilities. That's where I started my journey into always liking to see what's the new in technology and how is it that we can architect solutions with the new technology to serve the business. And I did 14 years at Motorola, ran a very large program for NASA, all IT services, modernization, moved to Pepsi, and that's when I started really focusing a lot on how to bring cybersecurity and a CTO function together. Then from there, I spun off into a little bit of consulting on this side of as my passion. And then Microsoft pulled me in, and I did 6 years of business process and quality work. And basically, it was figuring out how to de-risk business programs. So all IT programs, all the top 5 programs of every year for 6 years in a row, I had to make sure that the digital transformation within Microsoft was landed. And the reason I'm sharing you a little bit about my background is because it'll kind of unfold as to how is it that I started really getting into data. Data feeds business processes. We saw a lot of quality problems in the business process or the yield or flow of business processes. And that's really where I started getting really, really close to data governance capabilities. After Microsoft, I continued into more of a career of consulting, and I joined Capgemini. We built a center of excellence that was responsible for the privacy center of excellence within Capgemini. And that was right before the GDPR, began to really make its rumble into the world. Left Capgemini and ran as a Chief Technology Officer function, a data, cyber, and privacy integration set of services, which then bring me to Accenture, where I've spent the last 3 years. As you can see, I like being studious, so I love spending time in research programs. I did 10 years of the sister programs and research at MIT, been part of intellectual capital exchanges, boot camps at Stanford, Master of Science in Advanced Data Analytics and Decision Science from UW, and I'm a member of the NIST and the IEEE. So literally what I'm sharing with you is something that we're bringing to all of our clients. As you probably know about Accenture, it's a fairly large consulting firm. We specialize in bringing technology and applying technology to businesses. We're organized. We're over 730,000 people strong, and we're investing in blockchain, AI, Gen AI, and privacy. And cybersecurity happens to be one, as we call it, one of the growth engines. As we look into, how do we advance this privacy practice, data management and governance really becomes an important part of ensuring a firm is becoming privacy compliant. I added my LinkedIn there. If you want to reach out to me, please connect with me. I'd love to help you in your journey. And I'm super excited about this program. Having a Master of Science in Privacy Engineering is kind of like, wow, this is something super awesome that Carnegie Mellon University is doing. I've been invited by Carnegie Mellon University before to speak at the SecDevOps Tokyo as a keynote back in 2020. And I've had a lot of respect for this university over the years in my career. I'm going to move this to the side so you can see it a little better. Okay, so how do we prepare? What are the phases of data governance, and why does it matter, and what are the challenges that you see in data governance that then kind of bleed over as privacy compliance challenges? So the first starts with, how do you frame the future of a data strategy that is compelling, forward-looking, realistic, and has good vision for your clients? And this is typically a data governance function that resides within the IT organization. They're not necessarily business process savvy. They look at data in terms of digits and structure. And so that's the beginning of why I'm telling you this is important, that as you move into privacy management, it's really important to understand not just the strategy of the data governance strategy of the firm that you're working on or you're going to be consulting for, but also, how do you look at all these multiple data initiatives and bring them together into a central strategy where that strategy should have privacy at the core? And what I'm seeing in this particular pillar of planning and preparation is that, I will tell you, just taking you back to even 2020, I saw firms starting to think about this problem, and even today, this is the kind of thing that I know is going to bring Accenture a lot of business over the next 3 years. And so it's with that lens that the deck I'm sharing you is what we're sharing with our clients as to why they need to start thinking a little bit differently and bring privacy compliance at the core and integrate it with the data governance. Most senior leaders of the firm, understand the business and IT priorities. They understand there's data challenges, but they see data governance as a back office function. Privacy brings those problems to the forefront, as you know, because of the regulation. And the challenges that I see in integrating here with data governance is that most leaders in the business are not close enough to the IT data governance initiative. The business runs the business, they worry about business processes. The data governance initiatives are separated usually from cybersecurity initiatives. Now, I sit in the cybersecurity function at Accenture, just like I did at Capgemini. And it's super important to bring cybersecurity into the fold of privacy. Why? Because if you're not secure, then it's very difficult to be private. As you know, the GDPR, for example, expects the ENIS to be the underpinning foundation of the 99 articles, not any different than the NIST privacy framework expects the NIST CSF to be the framework underpinning to provide cybersecurity capabilities so that you can meet the controls of the privacy framework. Privacy offices reside usually in legal departments. A lot of privacy lawyers out there. Lawyers are not technologists, right? So to me, this is an important pivot that will make this degree you're taking extremely valuable as privacy engineers. The GRC governance and risk compliance functions typically lack maturity in first and second lines of defense as it relates to privacy. Just explaining a little bit about what is first and second line of defense in cyber security terms. First line of defense are the people doing the job, i.e. the identity access management controls for multi-factor authentication. Who configures that? Who makes sure it's running every day? That's first line of defense. Second line of defense is usually a group within an organization that is responsible for ensuring that the first line of defense is doing their job. Third line of defense, external auditors. So now what we're seeing is, okay, what should how do we integrate these things, and what should the future state look like? The first thing is the folks involved in the program should understand the privacy law. We should be building a second line of defense internal to the company and seed privacy engineering there. And that's where I see it being the most successful, because not only are you helping the first line of defense, but you're serving as that barrier that is going to ensure that you are looking at PII in regulation in context of cyber audits a lot of cyber audits happen in isolation. So what happens then? And you end up having an audit for SOX and a different audit for FedRAMP and a different, and you have audits all over the place, but nobody's integrating all that. And that's part of what I do. So that's why I have privacy and cybersecurity as part of a cyber strategy function. As we read through the slide, I mean, I'm not going to read all of the words. I'm just basically going to do a talk over for interest of time. I will make the slides available to you all so you can study them. This in itself could be a day of teaching, just the deck here. So I'm just going to show you how the flyover works. First thing is know your data, understand if you have a data catalog. So for us privacy engineers, the first question I would ask is, where is the data catalog? Where there's no data catalog, it makes it more challenging to use data discovery tools so that you can consider, and understand what's the full inventory of the data. The other thing is data is not only at rest, but also is in transport. And a lot of the concern that I'm seeing from a cybersecurity perspective on a privacy matter is how APIs may be bleeding PII data out. So having things such as applications, make sure that applications have TLS the 1.2 enabled, make sure that the SecDevOps lifecycle involves, SAST, DAST, manual pen testing and privacy compliance testing for APIs, which is a whole new space we're getting into. Understand the type of data that is collected by each application, really starting to understand the business process first so that you understand what the application is carrying. Again, a data governance lead typically doesn't care if you're privacy compliant client, and now they're starting to care, and we're seeing these functions pretty much starting to come together. A lot of projects that are starting in cybersecurity are now starting to migrate and move into the data governance space, and vice versa. Some folks that may start privacy initiatives, data governance, end up talking to the CISO about how do they do this, right? A lot of the same tools are used. For example, if you're working with any entity that collects personal information to create a purchase, right? Then you need to be PCI compliant. By definition, you already have scanning going on for PII through PCI compliance type of tools. Example Experian. So, and those typically reside in cybersecurity. So as you can see, what's happening in privacy here is that the best way to do this is to map your business processes at a higher level and then map your applications that support those business processes. Then you go ahead and tag all of your applications and you start having an inventory of where your PII is, what matters most. Now, take all this in context. Firms are of different sizes, so the complexity of having 15 data sources is very different than having a complexity of over 5,000 data sources, right? So I get to see all of those, and privacy applies to all, right? So the important thing here, I'm sure you're familiar with data privacy impact assessments, super important part of the privacy framework and controls. Record of processing activities is becoming a more of a challenge now with the use of AI and now Gen AI. I'll be speaking on the 26th at Microsoft on Gen AI and the risk to regulatory compliance. Of course, privacy is one of those risks, right? Where you're saying, how do we think of this problem and how do we manage the data inputs into Gen AI so that we can trust what the models are telling us. And that is true for any ML AI use, and now even more important with Gen AI. And then, of course, how do you use that data, in the context of business terms? One of the areas where we're seeing a lot of interest now is in the Digital Marketing Act. The way I see that is really a regulation, as you may have already studied it, that sits over the top of your general GDPR, CCPA, CPRA. What we're after here in the DMA is particularly take a look at Section 5.2. What does that mean? What it means is that if you're a CPS or a cloud platform service provider, you are collecting personal information. And in this case, you have, the big firms, some of who I see in your program have already spoken with you. What we want to look at is if you're collecting data from a consumer, not only do you need to adhere to privacy regulation in general, and say GDPR for the EU countries, but over the top of that, how are you sharing that data within your firm across products, and more importantly, pushing campaigns out or leveraging for monetization with your marketing platforms? And what happens in a lot of these big companies is you may have lots of marketing platforms, but you may also have lots of products. And a lot of them are acting as holding companies as well, to products that in themselves act as businesses. So you can see some of that challenge. Some of the way in which we're addressing DMA literally is beginning with manual testings. Not any different that you do manual pen testings for cybersecurity and code. We're literally rationalizing what is that map of data, so where that data might be flowing, and how do we test and validate how these internal systems function. So it's a discovery job, right, for DMA. So moving on, if you have questions, please feel free to ask questions as we go, or just if I don't hear you speak up, then I will carry on. Okay. All right. Capabilities covered in this playbook. I added 9 things that are important terms for all of you to become flexible on. The context of data governance, data management strategy, data modeling, master data management, data quality, metadata management, data privacy and compliance, which is the core what I'm going to go focus on, then data mesh in the marketplace, and then more about where the data mesh is going. So in general, what is this data governance capability? Our clients choose to work with us on a variety of data governance related challenges. The first place to start, let's say that you get a job as a privacy engineer somewhere, here's some of the questions that you're going to see or hear as you start meeting. I encourage you to meet data governance functions. If you sit within the data governance functions, then naturally is going to be your journey, right? There is no single definition of what a customer is, as an example. Why is that important? Well, let's say that you're doing a DSAR, data subject right request process, and you're evaluating it for its efficiency and its data quality. Many companies have multiple definitions of customer depending on how the customer data was captured. So it's important then to understand how can we get closer to a single definition of customer. Is there such a thing as a customer master? Is the format, do we have a unique format for customer? Right? Or when I actually go do my PI data discovery exercises across many different applications, am I going to get back, different formats of what may be a customer? And, we see that a lot. And so you can see how these data governance challenges bleed over and manifest themselves into a privacy analyst, a privacy engineering have to make decisions about what do I do with that data, okay? This is a quick snapshot for you. Every capability I put in there, I gave you some example of, why is it important, how typically a consulting company helps you, how does this capability deliver value, some example of the assets that we have, and then, you see some of the vendors at the bottom of this capability. What's interesting to note here is that a lot of the vendors are born squared out of data governance functions And then they're starting to embrace data privacy capabilities. So an example of that is Big ID. You probably heard of Big ID or OneTrust, right? So I've happened to work with both. Christina Bergman was the CEO of a tool called Integris. It was a data discovery tool. She ended up selling that company to OneTrust, and that's the engine that actually does data location, data discovery. Big ID started as a data governance function trying to compete with Sperian. We talked about PCI compliance and PII scanners. Fabulous PII is very good PII scanner. It's not a data governance tool in itself. It only does the pure function of data discovery. However, it's grown into its ability to now offer more privacy process type of capabilities. This data governance vendors, they've been around for years, most notably Collibra. A lot of companies have Collibra or Informatica. I see less of the IBM, although, a lot of companies just buy a governance tool and they sit on it for years. Alation's fairly new to the game as compared to Collibra and Informatica, but it's a pretty good lightweight, as I see, data governance tool. Data management strategy, what do you worry about? How do you start defining? Again, always look at the single definition of what a customer is. It's always the root of all of these journeys. And again, in terms of when you think of customer, we need to think of customer not just in terms of B2B, business to business, but in B2C, business to consumer. And in business to consumer is the consumer definition of that, single definition of how are you curating customer data across all your platforms. And then deciding who's going to own the data, what are the data roles and responsibilities, what are the policies and controls that are going to help drive some of those definitions, formatting definitions and semantic definitions of what a customer really means. And then how are you going to scale data governance in terms of really building data custodians for your PII data in the business? Because if that doesn't happen, then you're basically kind of catching the ball downstream and just reporting on defects versus shifting left and moving quality upstream to the left. And that brings some of my career that I was sharing with you: quality, business excellence, understanding business processes, understanding the data consumed by those business processes will really help you segregate which applications and which business custodians are going to be most effective in helping you scale data governance and seeding a data management strategy that's going to function. At the end of the day, we want to become data-driven organizations. We want flexibility, performance, agility, and most importantly, risk mitigation. And at the core of risk mitigation is standing up privacy programs that allow you to meet the regulation. Data modeling, I'm in a bird's eye really over this. How do you define what are your critical data elements? Okay, so amongst all of the personal information that you collect that is subject to privacy, what are those critical data elements that you're going to make sure that you find and tag across all applications, and for which you need to now start working on those basic syntactic and semantical definitions that we just spoke about for data governance, so that you reduce the amount of defects that are being injected into your DSARs, your PIAs, DPIAs, ROPAs, etc. Okay. Master data management. This is the data about the data, which is basically how do you look at, what is a consistent view as to how we're managing all of this data across all of these systems. Master data management helps you with better decision making, compliance, enhanced customer experience. It is used for cross-selling and upselling opportunities. Now, what does that mean? Because you're having improved visibility to a single source of truth, providing a 360-degree view of customers, which now allows you greater business opportunities, which means you're going to be marketing across your products, which means that now you have Digital Marketing Act on top of that problem seeing, are you doing it right or not right? And guess who gets to check, to test if you're doing the MA right or not, particularly for Section 5.2, it's the privacy engineers. Okay, so this is why I think master data management and general data quality is important. Now, data quality, to the extent that you do items 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? There's a direct correlation to data quality. The better you do the first 4, the better data quality you're going to have. If you have poor data quality, then what's going to happen? Not only is it going to impact your ability to really have quality outputs of the privacy processes, but now you have AI and machine learning and now Gen AI, and it's garbage in and there's garbage out, right? It's that simple. So how can you trust the output of models when there was garbage data coming in? So a lot of what we're doing, in our businesses, we don't go and just use ChatGPT and OpenAI for core business process problems, business services. We're looking at models that harness their own data so that we can add some data quality to the data that is being fed to the model. Why? Because we got to be able to trust the outputs. Okay. Some of the tools for data quality, I see a lot of Atacama out in there. I talked a little bit about Elation. If you're kind of a small, medium-sized business, Elation is definitely an easier lift. You've heard of TIBCO, Oracle, a lot of SAP, Collibra and Informatica continue to be big players in that. And as you can see, when you start looking at data quality, you start saying, how mature are we? How do I know what good looks like? What's my posture as it relates to data quality? And that's where the conversations start to get interesting. Metadata management, again, if you don't have data about your data, how can you properly map and transform data elements across systems? Give you an example. The formatting issue of what a customer number looks like. There's data about that data in itself, and then there's the data itself. So you got to create some kind of common understanding of what information should be captured in the fields, resulting in consistent data. Otherwise, you will get inconsistent data. There is no single definition, and inconsistent data leads to poor data quality. Okay, I'm going to hop over metadata management so we can get into more in depth. So now with that primer of data governance, capabilities, data quality, data privacy and compliance fall square into that overlap. We have data governance consultants that are doing privacy consultants, compliance consulting. And what we're doing now is the data governance practice that Accenture is saying, well, how do we think of this problem together, right? So this is the core of things.
Before you get started on this section, we do have a question in the chat.
Oh, yes, thank you. Let me put the chat.
Yeah, the question is, what are your thoughts on synthetic data to improve data quality and its privacy and governance risks? There could be concerns with the accountability and chain of custody there.
Yeah, well, when I think of synthetic data, it's good for proofs of concepts, but I would be careful in that, in context of solving a problem that's using real data, right? So, and I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to go test a technology for a client. We use synthetic data to test the technology itself, and I call it a POT, proof of technology. Very different than a POC, a proof of concept. A proof of technology uses synthetic data. You're checking the mechanisms of the technology, but you're not using real data. And when you do the proof of concept, it's kind of like saying, okay, let's test drive the bicycle and let's put a dummy on the bicycle and let's, we're going to, This technology propels the bicycle with a remote control. Okay, well, I'll do that with a dummy, not a human being. That's synthetic data. Once you do the POC, once you make sure it's safe and the technology functions, you understand how all this works, then we go into the real data, and that's how we manage that risk. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on to data privacy and compliance challenges. Non-compliance with data privacy regulations is at the top of mind of the head legal counsel and firms. You see the news. I mean, you see the reason why you're taking, this degree on. There's a lot of unauthorized access and misuse of sensitive data, and it happens across all functional verticals, meaning banking, pharmaceutical, and healthcare. About the only area where I see a lot less interest is DoD, right? And in DoD, you're going to have different challenges with another regulation called the CMMC. But to the extent that your company collects personal information for the reason of monetization, you're going to be, square looking at the privacy law. And of course, you're going to have reputational damage if you fail. Okay, so data privacy and compliance. Some of the vendors that you see are that I mentioned before. They're not the only ones. OneTrust and Big ID happen to be the ones that offer you more of a holistic, kind of all process view of things. But there are a lot of missed opportunities still from a technology perspective. So I'll give you an example. I'm just seeing a lot of innovation in the SecDevOps space as to how to even inject the right technology in the development lifecycle so that the data lineage of the PII could be discovered upfront as part of the execution of the code. There's a company out there that's making a lot of rumbles. They were out at APP, and the CEO is called Privado. And then there's also the downstream, like, okay, you as a company cannot control a browser. Anybody, hey, I got my cell phone here. I got my little browser, whatever browser settings I set up. There's a lot of third-party trackers in browsers that then bleed out your information. And consent management becomes very problematic. Okay, so the idea here is, what are you looking for? Increased data security, maximization of your data value, improving your customer experience while you're maintaining compliance. Because let's face it, privacy is perceived as the hammer, right? It's like an auditor. And so how do you start pivoting from being the bad guy to being a business value driver, right? Is how do you help improve data literacy within the organization? How do you reduce the cost of implementing proper data retention, deletion policies, and data quality? And then at the end of the day, you're going to be improving regulatory compliance. And this is really a journey. So how does it look? Well, we start with an assessment, right? It's like, okay, you're walking in, whether it's at the company you're at now, in the function of being a privacy engineer, a privacy analyst, a privacy governance lead, you're in the data governance organization. Let's say you're sitting in the business. What business processes are supporting your business? There's always an entry point to data privacy in which you can be useful and helpful. And it looks like this: assess where you are, right? What is the assist condition of your current data privacy maturity journey, right? It is perform an assessment. Then we describe, we use the tool and we describe the different subject areas of privacy that are important. Carnegie Mellon University developed COVID-5. We used a very similar approach in terms of maturity. right? We always want to say, like in any control cybersecurity audit, when you have a third line of defense, you need to be at least a level 3, right? So you document your controls, and then you say for each control, where are you, right? Is there a policy in place? And are people even aware of the policy and following the policy? Are there documented processes about how the policy applies for that particular control? Or is there evidence of that? Is it a repetitive approach, or is it ad hoc, right? To get consistency, you at least want to get a 3 is consistency. 4 and 5 are more automation. I've yet to see even the most automated companies in the world have trouble when you do a data privacy assessment and you start putting together a control framework like the NIST privacy framework, for example, and assess them using a COVID-5 framework. That intersection is super valuable to understand what are the areas where you might have some gaps, right? So it's a series of questionnaires, and then we provide the results out. Now, what are the general capabilities that we assess? As you're saying, okay, what should you have in your toolkit, right? Good data privacy tool should offer a comprehensive set of functions. We see 22 areas. Data discovery classification is key. Inventory and data cataloging, data mapping, business process management, policy management, access controls, data security, reporting and dashboards, collaboration, and incident management. And you'll see how the different activities fall under that. And this is the slide where for going to market to our clients, we're basically bringing data governance folks and privacy engineers to work together to develop the maps for, okay, what technology the company needs to use or already has that can meet these requirements, and then where is it that they fall in terms of maturity level. Now, this is a nice overview. This is kind of what it looks like. Okay, so now you're saying, okay, now I'm going to take all of those capabilities and I'm going to take a control framework. Take the NIST privacy frameworks as an example. You're going to have 3 levels in this assessment. Some companies, even if you start at a higher level, right? But always make sure you go into the function, the families, and then the controls themselves, so you understand where they are. And interestingly enough, what we like to do is say, okay, tell me how you feel you do this. This is a relative scale of 1 to 5, just like COVID, like I explained, where 3 is effective, and it will most likely pass a formal third-party audit. If it doesn't, then it falls below a 3. The way people assess themselves versus the way we assess them, having this very strong framework shows you the variability of perspective. The other thing that's important to know is that when you look at frameworks don't cover the ability to exercise across many platforms, and this makes it problematic. So one of the things that I've done with one of the tools that we built is the Power BI, privacy assessment framework, is that I added the pivot of exercise, as you can see, right? So let's say that you have excellent protective capabilities, right? So your data protection is very, very strong, but guess what? You're only exercising that in a few of your systems. And we talked about the issue of volume, right? If I have, 1,500 systems in a company versus I have 10 systems in a company, well, guess what? If you have PII, the law doesn't care where you put it. They just care that you account for it. So the ability for you to do this assessment against every system that collects PII and then measure your ability to identify, protect, govern, and communicate the privacy framework and the functions and controls behind the privacy framework are going to really tell you, maybe there's pockets of goodness in this company where, this one system did amazing. And I had a company, this is the example output of the company I did assessment for, but the rest of the systems could actually leverage that goodness so that they can improve their ability to exercise the privacy capabilities across the board. I'm going to jump over the data marketplace fairly quickly, just for the interest of time. I know we're 10 minutes out, but this is where DMA comes in. So now take those systems for which you collected the data, and now digital marketing access, how am I going to monetize that? Okay, if you monetize that, you also have to be able to meet DMA 5.2. DMA 5.2 is going to bring you lots of risks. And right now, what we're seeing with this is that we're literally doing manual testing as a mitigation for DMA 5.2. There is no magic bullet in technology that is going to tell you that you are not bleeding over sharing data and using it in a way that the consent management process has really cleansed out all of that data. And this is where privacy tools come in, right? It's like, okay, you consent to this. Yes, I consent to this. Well, guess what? Now behind the scenes, you just propagated all that PII across all of your data sources. The marketing systems now have all of your PII data. They're going to start sending you propaganda, right? Like, hey, because you bought this book about birds, you most likely like this pictures about birds too, and now that's a different product, right? So guess what? That's a violation of privacy law. So that's where we are literally right now in the journey. There's a lot more happening in data governance, the concept of data mesh. I added it in there for you. I wouldn't worry too much about data mesh unless you're working on a data mesh. Glad to be here to reach out and have a conversation with you about how we're thinking of data mesh. One of the areas where we're starting to see opportunities for privacy, particularly, is in Snowflake. So when you have a data mesh, part of what you got to do also is be able to protect it. I'll give you an example. I didn't add the product name, but one of the proof of concepts that we're looking at is how do you take all data that you feed into Snowflake, where that data is PII, and how do I replace that data element in the Snowflake environment with a key and push all of the data to a protected cloud that is barricaded with networks, etc., so that you're protecting the PII and at least it's not sitting out there, with everything else. There's a tool called Skyflow that we're working on right now, and I'm responsible for that relationship with Accenture. And that's a perfect example, back to the chat question, where we're doing the proof of technology first with synthetic data, and then we'll work with the pharmaceutical company to actually do the actual real data scenario. I see another question here. Any thoughts on the fact that purpose and lawful basis are typically not found within technological solutions, except for consent management platforms at best? Absolutely. That's the whole point of thinking of data privacy in context of all of these things. So as a privacy engineer, each one of these could be a class in itself, each of the gray boxes. But absolutely, that's part of the issue, is that because I don't know what your jobs are, but if you come from a business background, then you're going to be able to talk more in business terms than you would technology, right? And if you come from a technology background, then it's going to be a harder reach to go over to, what is that in context of business, right? In context of lawful processing. So law and business are an easier conversation to have, right, than techies, right? So CTO, CISO. So I will tell you that my job for 6 years at Microsoft was a beautiful learning opportunity, that I had to get very, very close to the business processes. I had to drive with business process by design up front. I had to think of data quality up front. That's not any different than what is required now to be able to meet regulatory compliance. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing just in case there's more questions. Just looking at time at 10:23.
there is one more related to kind of your role and the data privacy arm of Accenture. I guess has your organization been expanding? Has it particularly has there been a spike due to recent regulation?
Yes, absolutely. Cybersecurity and privacy kind of, like I said, we got it in the same organization. We've grown since 2018. We've grown from under 1,000 people to almost 8,000 people, so it's pretty strong. In cyber, we moved privacy as a core offering to cyber strategy, and last year we had one person starting the capability. Now we have 200 people.
Yeah, pretty impressive growth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we're also happy to advertise any open positions that you think might be of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually happen to be the staffing lead for the practice as well, as we call it, the plus one. So I get to see all of the incoming recruits from university, as well as, from analyst all the way to, senior manager levels. What are the opportunities for different projects? So glad to talk to you about your graduating students and their opportunities at Accenture.
Great. And then there's another question that came in. So the student is curious about your upcoming talk on Gen AI and regulation. Could you briefly talk about how Gen AI is shaping the various fields that you mentioned in the data privacy handbook?
Sure. So what's happening with Gen AI is, it's kind of like the new toy to play with, right? It's like the new Lego color, right? Like we've never seen before. And so everybody wants to look at it and and this typically happens, right? We're all very familiar with the Gartner, hype of expectation and trough of disillusionment on technology, right? There's always great hope of what technology is going to do for you, and then you learn from it. And then there's a trough of disillusionment, and like certain capabilities are very applicable, other capabilities are not so great. Well, with Gen AI, there's a great risk to privacy. Think about it, right? Because you are making decisions about personal information that you fed to an engine. And that could become very problematic, right? Because we need to be able to trust the data. So Gen AI is not yet shaping how the different functions need to come together. Right now, what I see in industry is Gen AI is the new toy. And the reason for the talk at, Microsoft, Avanade, Accenture coming together is saying, we're the companies that let this cat out of the bag. We're the companies that give you the toy to go play with. How is it then that we need to think of ensuring that when the models are fed, the data A is valid and trustworthy? So this back to data quality. And how do we make sure that we don't just feed data from general sources, that we have certain amount of containment about this data? And that's where the Gen AI engineers and the data privacy engineer need to start working together to figure out what is it that you're feeding your engine so that your output could be of greater quality, could be trustworthy, and you could start avoiding some of the pitfalls of of privacy. Particularly of interest, again, is for the CPSs, or the cloud platform service providers. It's their big companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft, right? The cloud providers, where let's say that you buy a book, and all of a sudden you also get the Audible, right, version of a different book that kind of looks like it because you liked it. But guess what? You might also be served a suggestion about a YouTube in your inbox. That's total privacy regulation, right? So now you go, and consent management goes in all this, right? So Gen AI is just saying, I'm making suggestions and generating and regenerating suggestions. And at the same time, you're trying to contain the consent management process. You see the problem? It's On one side, you're trying to do risk management and containment of consent across platforms. And on the other side, GenAI is saying, oh, I got this data over here. I'm going to use it. I'm going to make a recommendation for you. So there is a tension amongst these two, the regulation and GenAI. And there is, I suggest you read the AI Act. The AI Act talks all about, that's where DMA comes from, the Digital Marketing Act. And it basically says whoever is responsible for the engine, creating and using and training that engine for the purpose of your business, they are accountable to the privacy regulation, right? So hopefully that answers your question. Data mesh is not any different, right? We talked a little bit about, Snowflake. You go start proliferating data on a cloud environment as in a large container per se, you still need to manage that and control that. Not because the data is no longer stored in, say, in your SAP ERP system, you're not accountable anymore. Yes, you're still accountable. And what's happening here is, like I said, technology is going really, really fast. And privacy regulation is kind of like the brakes it's the brakes, right? It's the pedal that allows you to say, hey, you can go fast, but not so fast that you're going to break something, right? At the end of the day, the privacy regulation protects the consumer, the natural human, right? And that's what I see in this laws. Did I cover all the questions?
Thanks. Yeah, those are the ones in the chat. And if you have an additional minute, I'd like to hear your thoughts. And you mentioned that data governance is kind of a has broader scope than just privacy. I'm wondering if you ever see tension between kind of the privacy component of data governance and other kind of functions that data governance serves.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, like I said, data governance is more of a friend, right, to privacy. And many times where I see the tension is that the privacy engineers might sit in a privacy program under the legal department, right? Or they might, or they might sit in cybersecurity, some firms, or they might sit as part of the data governance practice. So it's a matter of we as people, as human beings, need to understand that all these capabilities help us to do a better job at meeting privacy regulation. And as long as we have that lens in mind, then my suggestion to the students would be more open about learning new things on data governance capabilities, because they'll make you a better privacy engineer. And it doesn't matter where the organization, has structured the job of standing up a privacy program. I think what's important is just understand that there's all these different capabilities that can help you in your privacy engineering journey.
Great. Thank you so much for that last thought. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. So what are the ongoing implementations of Gen AI in Deloitte? Oh, sorry.
So I do have to let you know I am late for another meeting. I only have
Sorry,
till
I didn't know you had
10:32.
a hard stop at 1:30. Yeah, maybe we can have the student follow up over email.
Yes, absolutely. If you can collect all the questions you may have, and glad to have another session with you guys on anything you need. Count on me, and you have my LinkedIn as well.
Okay, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.